My name is Clarissa Rowe, 32 years old. The rain outside my apartment window tapped a rhythm against the glass, heavy and persistent, like an impatient drummer refusing to be ignored. I should have stayed home that Thursday night, curled under my blanket with a glass of Merlot, letting the storm sing me to sleep. Instead, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, smoothing the black dress Adrien once said made me look powerful. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, a promotion, a raise, a promise of the future we had been building together. When his call came, my lipstick slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. Canceling dinner with his parents? Family emergency? I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the unease in his voice was simply fatigue, not deceit. Love meant trust, right? That was what I kept telling myself. And yet my feet carried me down Fifth Street, hoodie up, baseball cap low, as if some instinct deep inside me already knew the truth. The restaurant glowed like an island of warmth against the storm. Through its wide windows, I saw the golden light, the clink of glasses, couples leaning close over candlelit tables. I told myself I'd just walk by, just confirm that nothing was wrong. But then I saw him. Adrien. My Adrien. His shoulders hunched in the way they always did when he was nervous, fingers running through his dark hair. And across from him, auburn hair, laughter like champagne bubbles, and his parents sitting beside her with eyes that glowed with approval. I froze. The woman's name hit me like a knife when Margie White called it out. Bessie. The one that got away. The one he had told me about in half shrugs and quick stories, like she was a ghost from his past. Except she wasn't a ghost. She was right there, alive, radiant, her hand intertwined with his. I slid into a hidden corner, heart pounding so loudly I was sure someone would hear it. My eyes blurred, but my ears sharpened, catching every cruel word. Adrien's parents, laughing, praising him for being clever. Adrien himself, calling me pathetic, dismissing me as nothing more than a wallet with legs, a walking ATM. Each word was acid dripping down my spine. My throat burned, but no scream came. Instead, I sat in silence, my nails digging crescents into my palms, as I listened to them plan a future funded by my stupidity, the apartment deposit, the gifts, the dinners, all of it on my dime, my generosity turned into their inside joke. I stumbled away before I collapsed there on the floor. The night air hit me like shards of glass. By the time I reached my building, the rain had worsened, pounding against the concrete as if mocking me. I moved like a ghost through my apartment, seeing every object with new, hateful clarity. His cologne bottle on the dresser, the watch I bought him resting smugly on the nightstand, his shoes by the door as though they belonged. And then something inside me snapped. The rage came in waves, hot and feral at first, then icy and controlled. I gathered his things, every tie, every shirt, every trace of him that had invaded my space. My arms loaded with evidence of 8 months of deceit, I walked down to the street, letting the storm baptize his possessions. The leather jacket, the silk shirts, the polished shoes, dropped one by one into a soggy monument of lies. Mrs. Rodriguez from 4B passed by, her dog tugging at the leash. She paused, watching me empty my apartment of him. "Spring cleaning?" she asked with a sly smile. "Something like that," I answered, my voice steadier than I felt. She patted my arm, eyes glinting with quiet knowing. "Good for you, mija. Sometimes you have to throw out the trash before the air can breathe clean again." When she left, I stood in the downpour, staring at the heap that used to be my love story. 8 months, reduced to soggy fabric and ruined leather. I should have been sobbing. Instead, I felt a strange calm, as if the storm had washed something away. But it wasn't enough, not nearly enough. Upstairs, I opened my laptop. My fingers trembled at first, but soon moved with precision. Adrien thought he'd chosen a fool, a desperate woman blinded by love. But he had forgotten one thing. I was an accountant. I lived in numbers, in details, in patterns. Numbers never lied. People did. I started digging. The black Amex I had given him showed dinners at restaurants I'd never stepped foot in, hotel charges in places he claimed he'd never been, boutique purchases for women who weren't me. $15,000, siphoned in 3 months, hidden in plain sight. And then there were the cash advances, carefully staggered, Small enough to avoid alarms, but adding up like cuts that eventually bleed you dry. Screenshots, spreadsheets, records. I built my case the way I built every audit. Slow, meticulous, airtight. His laptop was a goldmine. Emails with Bessie, messages with his friend Jake, boasting about the money train. They laughed about me, my apartment, my promotion, the future I thought was ours. Adrien didn't just betray me, he mocked me. By the time the storm eased, I had a folder thick with evidence, not just of cheating, but of fraud, of theft, of a man so arrogant he believed he'd never get caught. I stared at the documents, the emails, the laughing texts, and something inside me crystallized. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. This wasn't even anger. It was war. Adrien White had called me pathetic, had told his parents I was nothing more than a paycheck with a heartbeat, but he had underestimated me. He had mistaken silence for weakness, generosity for stupidity, and that mistake was going to cost him everything. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet hum of the apartment. My chest still ached, but beneath the ache was steel. Tomorrow, I thought, the real work begins. The morning light crept reluctantly through my blinds, pale and cold, as if even the sun didn't want to touch the wreckage Adrien had left behind. My body ached from exhaustion, but my mind was a machine, calculating, assembling, determined. Coffee steamed in my mug, bitter and strong, though I barely tasted it. My kitchen table had transformed overnight into a crime lab. Stacks of receipts, credit card statements, screenshots, and Adrien's abandoned laptop glowing with damning secrets. I started where any accountant would, with the numbers. Every transaction from the black Amex I had foolishly given him was plotted on a spreadsheet. Rows of dinners, boutique charges, hotel stays. I color-coded them. Red for restaurants, blue for travel, green for luxury items. The sheet lit up like a carnival of deceit. My money had been the fuel for his charade, every charge a brick in the castle he'd been building with someone else. At first, the pattern was simply theft. But then, as my fingers flew across the keys, I saw more. Timing. Intent. The same weekends he told me he was visiting his sick uncle in Jersey, there were hotel charges in Manhattan. The day he claimed his card was frozen, there was a purchase for Bessie's favorite perfume. Adrien wasn't sloppy. He was strategic. He'd built a double life on my dime and laughed about it with Jake Damien, the parasite who egged him on. I found the text buried in his chat logs. Jake, how's the money train, bro? Adrien, full steam. Just got her to cover my car insurance for the year. Jake, classic move. How much she worth, you think? Adrien, her apartment's $800K easy. Plus she just made partner. Serious cash. She thinks I'm her soulmate. It's almost sad. Almost sad. I stared at those two words until my eyes blurred. My love, my loyalty, my laughter with him over coffee in the mornings, reduced to almost sad. I wanted to smash the laptop, but instead I printed every vile line, hole-punching them into a binder. Rage was fuel, but evidence was power. Adrien thought he had chosen a desperate fool. He'd chosen the wrong accountant. By midday, my dining table looked like an FBI evidence board. I hadn't noticed the rain had stopped until a beam of sunlight hit the photos of Adrien and me, still scattered across the counter. Him kissing my temple, him laughing in Central Park, him holding my hand like it meant something. I gathered the photos and shoved them into a drawer. They weren't evidence. They were poison. That afternoon, I carried the binder into Nelson and Associates. Elizabeth Hall, my partner, looked up from her desk the moment I walked in. Her sharp eyes swept over me, my stiff posture, my pale face, the black suit I wore like armor. You look like someone's about to get audited to death, she said dryly. Close, I replied, dropping the binder onto her desk with a heavy thud. She flipped it open, scanning receipts, emails, and printed messages. Her face hardened. This little bastard has been running a long con, and he's been stupid enough to leave a digital trail a first-year intern could trace. Stupid or arrogant, I muttered. Elizabeth leaned back, crossing her arms. What do you want to do, Clarissa? Everything, I said. Everything legal. Maybe even some things that live in the gray. A slow smile crept across her face, my favorite kind. Elizabeth wasn't just a partner. She was a former FBI forensic accountant with friends in places most people didn't even know existed. If anyone could turn my private hell into Adrien's public downfall, it was her. Detective Santos owes me a favor, she said, already pulling out her phone. Financial Crimes Division. He'll want to see this. While Elizabeth made her calls, I made mine. First to the bank, reporting unauthorized charges. Then to the credit card company, freezing accounts. Then to the apartment complex Adrien was planning to move into with Bessie, alerting them to fraud. Each call was a small reclaiming of ground, a piece of territory Adrien had stolen from me, now clawed back into my control. But I wanted more than my money back. I wanted him exposed. That's when I dialed Miranda Walsh, my old college roommate, now a senior producer at Channel 7 News. She picked up on the second ring, her voice bright with nostalgia. "Clarissa Rowe," she said, "I was just thinking about you last week. What's the occasion? Please tell me you're not calling to sell me life insurance." "I've got a story," I said. My voice surprised me, steady, strong, with an edge I hadn't heard in myself before, and you're going to want it. I told her everything, condensing 8 months into bullet points of betrayal and fraud. I left out the ache, the humiliation, the nights of laughter that had been lies. She didn't need those. What she needed was the scam, the pattern, the names of other victims, the financial records that proved Adrien wasn't just a bad boyfriend, but a serial predator. When I finished, there was a pause on her end. Then, "This is gold, Clarissa. Women will see themselves in this. They'll realize they're not alone. We'll nail him to the wall." Her certainty was oxygen. "Good," I said softly. "That's what I want." By the time I left the office that night, Elizabeth had arranged a meeting with Detective Santos, Miranda was pulling research on similar scams, and Adrien's credit lines were collapsing like dominoes. Still, when I returned home, the silence of the apartment pressed against me. The furniture, the photos, even the smell of Adrien's cologne lingering in the hallway, it all mocked me. I sat at the table again, opening my binder, flipping through page after page. The evidence was airtight. Adrien would pay. And yet, beneath the fury, shame coiled in my chest. How had I, Clarissa Rowe, partner at a prestigious firm, respected, smart, let myself be conned like this? How had I explained away every red flag, told myself every cruel word was just a bad day? I thought of my mother's voice years ago. "Don't give too much of yourself, Clarissa. Some people will take until there's nothing left." She'd been right. Adrien had taken and taken until there was almost nothing left, but she hadn't accounted for one thing. When stripped bare, I discovered steel. Tomorrow, Adrien White would learn that he had created his own executioner. The plan unfolded like choreography, every step timed, every role assigned. Elizabeth called it a symphony, each instrument striking when cued. I called it justice. Friday evening, I stood before the same mirror where 2 nights earlier I'd smeared lipstick in shock. This time, the red on my lips wasn't for him. It was war paint. My black dress clung like armor, my bracelet concealing the tiny wireless transmitter Miranda's team had slipped me earlier. My pulse thudded in my ears, but my hands were steady. Adrien had texted me all day, confused, concerned, then angry. But when I called and invited him to dinner, he agreed in seconds. A predator never walked away from free prey. "Chateau Marmont, 8 o'clock, I'd told him. He hesitated only long enough to betray his guilt before agreeing. The restaurant glowed exactly as it had the night I discovered the truth. The same golden lights, the same gentle hum of conversation, the same scent of rosemary and wine lingering in the air. But tonight, I wasn't sneaking in like a ghost. Tonight, I was walking straight into the lion's den with a leash in my hand. Adrien was already seated at a corner table, the same posture, the same carefully styled hair, though his eyes darted around the room like a man awaiting judgment. He rose when he saw me, that practiced smile sliding across his face like a mask he'd worn too often. "Clarissa," he said warmly, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I let him. His lips barely brushed my skin, but it was enough to remind me of the nights I had believed that touch meant love. Now it meant nothing. "You look incredible," he said. "Thank you," I answered, sliding into the chair opposite. My voice was calm, level, a storm restrained. The waiter appeared, and Adrien ordered wine without consulting me. I asked for water. I needed clarity, not fog. "So," he said, leaning forward, voice pitched with false concern, "what's this crisis you mentioned?" I met his gaze, letting silence stretch long enough for sweat to bead along his hairline. It's complicated. A lot of lawyers, a lot of unhappy clients. He exhaled in relief. He thought he understood again. His world required me to be frantic and dependent so he could be the savior. You know you can talk to me about anything, he said, reaching across the table. His hand hovered, then landed lightly over mine. I didn't pull away. Not yet. We've been together 8 months, I said, steady. We've talked about moving in, combining finances, marriage. His eyes gleamed. Exactly. That's what I want. Everything with you. I tilted my head, studying him like a specimen. But here's the thing, Adrien. I pay for everything. Clothes, food, rent deposits, even your car insurance. What exactly are you bringing to this partnership? His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Clarissa, I can't believe you'd keep score. Love isn't about money. Exactly, I said. My tone sharpened. So if it's not about money, you won't mind if I cancel the cards, cut off the expenses, and we split everything 50-50. The mask cracked. Panic flickered in his eyes before he smothered it. I'm between jobs right now. Once my graphic design business takes off. What business? I snapped, my voice slicing through the hum of the restaurant. Heads turned. He shrank, lowering his voice. It's complicated. No, I said, leaning closer. What's complicated is explaining why your friend Jake knows more about my finances than I do. What's complicated is Bessie Caden. Should I go on? The color drained from his face. How do you... The same way I know about the other women, I cut him off. My words were cold steel, steady and deliberate. The same way I know you used me as your personal ATM while planning your happily ever after with someone else. He stared, his practiced charm faltering, his voice breaking into a whisper. You were there. You heard. I heard everything, I said. Every laugh, every cruel joke, every plan you built on my money. His hands trembled now, gripping his glass too tightly. Clarissa, please, I can explain. Explain? I leaned back, folding my arms. Explain how you stole from me, how you forged signatures, how you plotted to ghost me after I paid for your future with another woman. Silence fell heavy. His mouth worked, but nothing came. For once, Adrien White, the man who always had an answer, was speechless. I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila folder. I laid it on the table, pushing it toward him with deliberate care. What's this? His voice cracked. Your life, I said. Bank statements, emails, police reports, testimonies from your previous victims. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Photos spilled across the table. Sarah Mitchell, Jessica Williams, Rebecca Rivera. All women he had drained like he drained me. His breath came shallow, ragged. You can't do this, he whispered. I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm letting you face the consequences of your own choices. He looked up then, eyes wild, desperate. Why are you doing this to me? The question was almost laughable. Even now, he saw himself as the victim. Because you made me believe I was worthless, I said softly, but with venom. Because you turned my love into your punchline. Because someone needs to make sure you never do this to anyone else. I stood, smoothing my dress. Behind Adrien, by the entrance, I saw Detective Santos step forward. Outside, Miranda's camera crew adjusted their angles, their lenses fixed on the table. You have 2 choices, I said. You can come quietly and maybe get a deal, or you can run and spend the rest of your life hunted. His face collapsed, shoulders sagging. The mask was gone. He was just a man cornered, stripped of lies. The click of handcuffs echoed through the restaurant like a gavel. Conversation stopped, diners turned, and Adrien White was led through the room, head down, shoulders slumped. Flashes from Miranda's cameras bathed him in white light. His downfall was no longer a secret whispered between lovers. It was broadcast for the world to see. And I didn't look away. The news broke before dawn. Channel 7's headline glared across television screens. Romance scammer exposed. Multiple victims speak out. Adrien's face filled the screen, pale and broken, a far cry from the man who once charmed entire rooms with a smile. I sat on my couch, clutching a mug of coffee gone cold, watching my private nightmare become public record. The footage was brutal. His arrest at Chateau Marmont, the evidence folder spread across the table, Detective Santos reading him his rights while Miranda's cameras captured every twitch of his jaw. My name was blurred from documents, but my voice carried in the background. Strong, steady, almost unrecognizable to me. By mid-morning, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Colleagues from the firm, distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. even my mother calling from Florida, her voice trembling with fury at the man who had hurt her daughter. But the calls that mattered most came from numbers I didn't recognize. "Is this Clarissa Rowe?" a woman asked hesitantly. "Yes. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a doctor. Adrien stole $40,000 from me 3 years ago. I thought I'd never see justice until I saw your story last night." Her voice cracked. "Thank you for not being too ashamed to come forward. You gave me back my dignity." Another call, another voice. Jessica Williams, a lawyer who had paid for Adrien's supposed tuition. Then Rebecca Rivera, a software engineer whose savings had vanished into his phantom startup. One by one, their stories poured through the line, different details, same pattern: charm, manipulation, financial ruin. Each voice stitched into me a strange mix of grief and relief. I wasn't alone. I hadn't been singled out because I was foolish or desperate. I was one of many. That realization steadied me more than any victory could. By afternoon, Elizabeth breezed into my office at Nelson and Associates, her heels clicking like gunfire. She dropped a stack of folders on my desk. 3 other women, complaints that never made it past embarrassment. Santos is building a case that could put Adrien away for years. Years, I repeated, the word tasting both sweet and hollow. Years in prison wouldn't erase the months he stole from me. But it was something. Elizabeth studied me. "You don't look triumphant." I shook my head. "I don't feel triumphant, just unfinished." She leaned back in her chair. "Good. Stay hungry. We're not done yet." She was right. We weren't. Because that evening, the story took a darker turn. At 7 o'clock sharp, my assistant knocked on my door. "There's a woman here to see you," she said carefully. "She says her name is Bessie Caden." My blood ran cold. "Send her in and stay close." The woman who entered looked nothing like the radiant auburn-haired beauty I had seen at the restaurant. Her hair hung limp, her clothes wrinkled, her face pale with sleeplessness. She closed the door behind her, eyes locking onto mine with a strange mix of defiance and desperation. "Miss Rowe," she said, her voice controlled but trembling at the edges. "Thank you for seeing me." "You have 3 minutes," I replied, not offering her a seat. She sat anyway. "What you heard that night? It wasn't the whole truth." I laughed, sharp and humorless. "Really? Which part wasn't true? The part where Adrien called me pathetic? Or the part where he bragged about using me to pay for your future together?" She flinched, but her gaze held. "I never called you pathetic. That was him. And when he said those things, I felt sick. But you need to know, I was trapped too." "Trapped?" I echoed, my voice rising. "You planned a future with stolen money. You sat at that table smiling while I was funding your fairy tale." Bessie's composure cracked. Her hands twisted in her lap. "Adrien told me you knew. He said you were helping him because you wanted him happy, even if it wasn't with you. He said you were like a sister to him, that you supported us." The lie was so outrageous I nearly choked. "And you believe that?" "I wanted to," she whispered, "because the alternative was admitting the man I loved was a criminal." Her eyes shone with something, remorse, maybe, or performance. I couldn't tell. I searched her face for the same practiced charm Adrien had wielded. Instead, I saw exhaustion, regret, and the fragile threads of someone unraveling. "The night at the restaurant," she continued softly, "was the first time I heard him speak about you that way. And I realized if he could be so cruel about someone who had shown him nothing but kindness, then everything he told me about us was probably a lie too. That's why I left him." I folded my arms. "And yet here you are. What do you want from me, Bessie? Forgiveness? Solidarity? A character witness?" "Nothing," she said, standing slowly. "I just wanted you to know Adrien didn't only manipulate you. He manipulated me too. He used my name to open credit cards, loans. I'm facing charges in California because of him. I was his partner, yes, but also his victim." She reached the door, then turned back, her voice barely audible. "Adrien White is a monster. The worst part? He's so good at what he does, he makes you believe you're the villain in your own story." Her eyes softened. "I'm glad you were strong enough to fight back. I wish I had been." And then she was gone, leaving only the faint scent of rain and perfume in the room. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty chair she had claimed without permission. Was she telling the truth? Or was this another layer of the con, another performance designed to shift blame and win sympathy? Didn't matter. Whether she was a victim or a co-conspirator, the outcome was the same. Adrien Whitehead's empire was crumbling, and Bessie's world was not far behind. But her words clung to me like smoke. He makes you believe you're the villain in your own story. And for a moment, I wondered if she was right. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and nerves, a mix of old wood polish and too many whispered confessions. I sat in the front row, binder in hand, while Adrien shuffled into the room in shackles, his once polished shoes replaced by scuffed prison issue. He didn't look at me, but I felt the weight of his presence like a shadow that refused to lift. Judge Daniels presided, her voice clipped and precise. "Mr. White, you stand accused of multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny." The charges rolled on, a litany of thefts across years, faces of women who once believed in him flashing through my mind. Sarah, Jessica, Rebecca, myself. Each of us had paid a price for his charm. Each of us sat here now, united by survival. Adrien's lawyer tried to frame him as a man who'd lost his way, someone overwhelmed by financial desperation. I almost laughed. Desperation didn't come in Armani suits bought with stolen credit cards. Desperation didn't sip $200 wine at dinners paid for with my promotion bonus. When it was my turn, I stood. My voice did not shake. Adrien White is not a man who stumbled. He is a man who planned. He studied weaknesses the way others study books. He identified compassion and turned it into currency. He took what was freely given, love, trust, generosity, and forged it into a weapon. He didn't just take money. He took confidence, dignity, years of our lives. And he laughed while he did it. Adrien finally looked at me then. His eyes weren't pleading or remorseful. They were flat, calculating, as if still searching for an angle, but there was nothing left to bargain with. The sentence came down heavy, 7 years in federal prison, followed by probation. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. It wasn't enough for the women who lost their savings, but it was more than most of us had dared to hope. When the bailiff led him away, I didn't feel triumph. I felt closure's first breath. Bessie's case unfolded across the country. In California, prosecutors unveiled her history of scams, posing as a struggling artist, manipulating wealthy men into funding her dream. Yet in court, she testified against Adrien, revealing how he'd used her identity for his East Coast fraud. Her cooperation earned her a plea deal, 3 years in prison. Whether remorse had truly cracked through her, or whether she'd simply chosen self-preservation, I didn't know. Meanwhile, Elizabeth threw herself into the aftermath with me. "We'll get some of your money back," she promised, though her tone was pragmatic. Asset forfeiture was messy. Adrien's bank accounts were frozen, his possessions seized, but untangling what was purchased with whose money was a labyrinth. Still, slowly, pieces returned. A portion of the unauthorized charges refunded by the bank, a refund check from the apartment complex where Adrien had tried to secure a lease with my card. Months later, I opened a letter from the insurance claim department, confirming that restitution proceedings would reimburse me for nearly half of what I'd lost. It wasn't everything. It would never be everything. But it was something. I sold the apartment. The walls whispered with too many memories, the air thick with Adrien's phantom presence. I bought a smaller place downtown, modest but entirely mine. Every lamp, every mug, every picture on the wall was chosen by me, for me. No ghosts, no parasites. Elizabeth teased me one evening as we unpacked boxes in my new living room. "You realize this whole thing has turned you into a vigilante accountant, right? You're basically Batman with spreadsheets." "Better wardrobe," I shot back, and for the first time in months, laughter bubbled from me, unforced. But she was right. Word spread quickly. Law firms called, asking if I'd consult on fraud cases. Detectives reached out for my expertise in victim patterns. Even strangers emailed, saying they'd seen the news story, thanking me for giving them courage. One evening, long after Elizabeth left, I sat at my desk, flipping through a fresh case file. A small business owner conned by her partner. Different details, same story. I felt that familiar heat in my chest, not rage anymore, but purpose. Adrien thought he'd broken me. What he had really done was forge me into something sharper. Still, nights were not always easy. Sometimes I'd wake at 3 a.m., heart racing, convinced I heard his key in the door. Sometimes I'd catch a whiff of cologne on the subway and nearly gag. Healing wasn't a straight line, but each day I clawed a little further from the wreckage. 6 months after the trial, I returned to the courthouse, not for Adrien, but for myself. I sat quietly in the gallery, binder unopened on my lap, watching another fraud case unfold. A young woman testified against her ex-boyfriend, her voice quivering with the same shame I once carried. I wanted to rise and tell her she wasn't alone, that predators thrived on silence, that speaking her pain aloud was already victory. Instead, I just listened. And when she finished, when she sat trembling in her seat, I caught her eye and gave a small nod. A silent message. You're stronger than you think. Outside, the city buzzed as though nothing monumental had happened. But for me, it had. Adrien was gone, his reign dismantled, his name dragged into the light. Bessie was behind bars, her schemes dismantled too. I had rebuilt a life from ashes. Yet beneath it all, a lingering truth pulsed. Justice was never the end. It was the beginning of a new kind of responsibility. And whether I liked it or not, I was ready to carry it. Central Park smelled of wet grass and roasted peanuts from a nearby cart, the kind of ordinary comfort that felt foreign after years of chaos. I was walking there one evening when I heard someone clear his throat behind me. "Excuse me, are you Clarissa Rowe?" I turned, instinct tightening in my chest. He was tall, lean, with kind eyes that didn't flinch when they met mine. In his hand was a folded copy of the Wall Street Journal. My name was on the front page, an article about the consulting work I'd been doing since Adrien's trial. "Yes," I said carefully. "My name's Michael Edwards," he said, offering a hand. "I'm a financial crimes prosecutor with the Manhattan DA's office. I wanted to thank you for what you've been doing, your testimony, your analysis. It's changed how we prosecute cases." There was no pitch in his voice, no sleazy undertone I'd learned to spot, just straightforward respect. We talked, standing under the archway as joggers streamed past us. He told me about his office's rising caseload, about victims too afraid to speak until my story hit the airwaves. "We've seen a 30% increase in reports since Channel 7 aired your case," he said. The number stunned me. My pain had rippled into something useful, something protective. For the first time in months, I felt the stirrings of pride, untangled from shame. Michael handed me his card. "We could use your insight on a case we're building. Similar profile, a man targeting professional women. Would you consider consulting?" I took the card, our fingers brushing briefly. "I'll check my calendar," I said, though something in me already knew the answer. That was the beginning. Over the next 2 years, Michael and I built something fragile but real. We started slowly, coffee meetings that turned into dinners, conversations that wandered from courtrooms to childhood memories. He knew my scars, and he never rushed me. With him, I didn't feel like a victim or a case study. I felt like myself. But healing wasn't linear. Trust was a language I had to relearn, syllable by syllable. Sometimes I'd pull back, questioning his motives, dissecting his kindness for hidden costs. He never resented it. He simply waited, steady and patient. One night, after we'd walked back from dinner, he stopped me outside my apartment. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," he said, his eyes soft. "But know this, I don't see you as broken, Clarissa. I see you as the sharpest person I've met in this city. And if you let me, I'd like to stand beside you, not above you." It was the exact opposite of Adrien's world. Respect instead of exploitation. Partnership instead of parasitism. By the time Michael and I began talking about moving in together, the ghosts of Adrien's betrayal had dulled. Not gone, never gone, but dulled into scars I could live with. Then the letter arrived. It came in a plain envelope, no return address. I slid it open, scanning the words until one line leapt out like a blade. "Adrien White, parole hearing scheduled." My hands trembled. My coffee spilled across the counter, staining the letter, but I couldn't stop reading. He had served 4 years of his 7-year sentence. As a victim, I had the right to attend, to testify, to speak of the damage he had caused. The air in my apartment felt suddenly thin. The idea of seeing him again, of hearing his voice, tightened every muscle in my body. That evening, I called Detective Santos, who had become a friend over the years. "I got the notice," I said quietly. "I figured you would," he replied. "You planning to fight the parole?" I stared out the window at the city lights. Part of me wanted to scream yes. to demand that Adrien stay locked away, to ensure he never had the chance to manipulate another soul. But another part of me, the part that had grown through years of healing, knew I couldn't let his shadow dictate my choices forever. "I'm going to testify," I said finally, "but not for revenge. I'll tell the board what he did, what it cost, why people like him need monitoring. After that, the decision is theirs." There was a pause, then Santos's voice softened. "That's a mature answer, Clarissa. Took me years to learn that justice isn't always punishment. Sometimes it's letting go. I wish letting go were as simple as hanging up a phone. But even as I slid the letter back into its envelope, my reflection in the dark window reminded me this was the last tether, and I wasn't sure if cutting it would free me or reopen the wound. The parole hearing room was smaller than I'd imagined. No sweeping courtroom, no dramatic echoes of a judge's gavel. Just a panel of 3 board members seated behind a long oak table, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and a scattering of chairs where victims could speak if they chose. I sat in the front, binder on my lap, the same one I had carried into court years earlier. It felt heavier now, not because of its contents, but because of the memories it carried. Elizabeth sat behind me for support, Michael at my side. Adrien entered through a side door in shackles, escorted by guards. Even in the drab jumpsuit, he tried to stand tall, his jaw lifted as though dignity could be salvaged through posture. His eyes flickered across the room, landing on me for only a second before skittering away. For the first time, I saw not the charming predator who once ruled my life, but a man aged by confinement, thinner, his confidence a cracked shell. The board began. His lawyer spoke first, weaving a story of rehabilitation. Mr. White has participated in therapy programs, completed financial responsibility courses, and expressed deep remorse for his past actions. He has a job offer waiting with a graphic design firm willing to give him a second chance. I nearly laughed. Graphic design. The same phantom career he'd used to siphon money from me. Some lies never died, they just changed wrapping. Then it was Adrien's turn. He cleared his throat, his voice softer than I remembered. "I made mistakes," he said. "Terrible ones. I let greed blind me. Prison has taught me humility, discipline, faith." He glanced briefly in my direction. "I can't undo the pain I caused, but I want the chance to live differently." The words were smooth, but the cadence was wrong, too rehearsed, too polished. It was the same performance he had given in every restaurant, every late-night conversation, every moment he'd convinced me love was real. "Ms. Rowe," the board chair said, "would you like to make a statement?" I rose, binder in hand, and walked to the small podium. My palms were damp, but my voice held steady. "My name is Clarissa Rowe. I was one of Adrien White's victims, though victim is too simple a word for what we endured. He didn't just steal money. He stole trust. He weaponized affection. He reduced love to leverage. When I met him, I believed generosity was a strength. He taught me to see it as weakness. He left me not just with debt, but with shame so heavy I could barely speak of it." Adrien shifted in his chair, but I didn't look at him. I looked at the panel. "I stand here today not to demand vengeance. He has served years already. That's the law's part. But I need this board to understand that the damage of his crimes is not measured in dollars. It is measured in sleepless nights, in broken self-worth, in the ripple effect that stretches into every relationship after. His rehabilitation is his responsibility, not mine to affirm. What I can affirm is this: men like Adrien do not stop unless watched, do not stop unless held accountable. Release him if you choose, but do not be fooled. He is a practiced liar. He fooled me. He fooled others. He may even be fooling you now." Silence spread through the room. The board chair nodded slowly. "Thank you, Ms. Rowe." I returned to my seat, my knees suddenly weak. Michael squeezed my hand, his thumb tracing steady circles across my skin. The board recessed for deliberation. The wait felt endless, each tick of the clock dragging me back through memories I wished I'd buried. Adrien's laughter at that restaurant, the humiliation that had fueled my revenge, the handcuffs clicking shut. Finally, the panel returned. The chair cleared her throat. "After reviewing the evidence and testimony, the board has decided to deny parole at this time. Mr. White will serve the remainder of his sentence, with the possibility of review in 2 years." Adrien's shoulders slumped. For the first time, the mask cracked. He looked empty. Not angry, not defiant, just hollow. Relief didn't flood me the way I expected. Instead, a quieter feeling settled in. Closure. The kind that didn't roar like triumph, but whispered like a door clicking shut. Outside, as we stepped into the sharp autumn air, Elizabeth grinned. "You were brilliant in there." Michael wrapped an arm around me. "You didn't just testify, Clarissa. You reclaimed the narrative." I exhaled, watching the breath cloud and vanish. I think this is finally the end." But even as I said it, I knew endings were never so clean. Somewhere out there, another woman was falling for another polished smile. Somewhere, another predator was writing his script. And whether Adrien stayed behind bars or not, I wasn't done. 6 months later, my office window overlooked a city bathed in late afternoon light, the kind that turned skyscrapers into molten gold. Holland Financial Investigations had grown faster than I'd dreamed. What started as a one-woman crusade at my kitchen table had become a team of 12. Analysts, legal liaisons, even a victim support specialist. Every desk buzzed with purpose, every case another small battle in a war I hadn't chosen but refused to abandon. That morning, I'd reviewed files from 3 women duped by the same entrepreneur promising investments in a fake startup. Their voices cracked with the same shame I once knew too well. Now, when I looked into their eyes, I could say the words with conviction. "You are not alone, you are not to blame, and we will fight back." Michael had become a steady presence through it all. We moved slowly, carefully. Dinners that turned into weekends, weekends that grew into talk of a shared home. He respected my independence, never tried to manage me, never made me doubt the ground beneath my feet. One night, as we sat on my balcony with the city humming below, he said, "You know, Clarissa, you don't just close cases. You close wounds." I didn't answer. I just leaned into him, letting silence speak. Then came the envelope, plain, unmarked, slipped through the mail slot like an intruder. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Notice of Adrien White's parole review, scheduled 2 years from now. My pulse skipped, but only once. The fear that used to coil inside me had lost its bite. This time I folded the paper, placed it in a drawer, and went back to work. Adrien no longer owned my nights. Weeks later, a new name crossed my desk. Amanda. 23. Terrified. Convinced her boyfriend was draining her finances under the guise of shared dreams. She had seen the documentary about my case on Netflix, had watched me sit under studio lights and tell the story of how I clawed back my life. She had dialed the number trembling, whispering, "I think it's happening to me too." Her words hit me like a mirror reflecting the past. I remembered the weight of shame, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, love was real, even when the evidence screamed otherwise. "You've come to the right place," I told her, pulling out a fresh notepad. "Start from the beginning." As she spoke, her story tumbled out with the same beats, lies rehearsed, money siphoned, dreams dangled like bait. My pen scratched across the page, but in my chest, something else stirred. Not the bitterness that once drove me, but purpose sharpened into clarity. Adrien had tried to break me. Instead, he had forged me into a weapon. When Amanda finished, her voice shaking, I said firmly, "We're going to stop him. You're not weak, you're not pathetic, and you're not alone anymore." Her silence broke into sobs, not of despair, but of relief. Later that night, as the city settled into twilight, I stood by my office window, watching headlights blur into ribbons of white. The rain had begun, soft at first, then steady. I thought back to the night I'd dumped Adrien's clothes onto the sidewalk, the storm baptizing the ruins of my old life. That night had felt like an ending. Now I understood it was a beginning. Adrien White would spend years behind bars. Maybe one day he'd walk free, but he would never be free of what I'd built, a network of women who refused to stay silent, an organization that turned betrayal into battle cries. My phone buzzed again. Another email, another story, another life about to change. I smiled, not bitterly, not vengefully, but with something steadier. My revenge had never been Adrien's prison sentence. My revenge was this, the life I rebuilt, the women I empowered, the justice I pursued. He had tried to write my ending, but I had written my own beginning, and I was just getting started.